Hello everyone, and hello Agustin. So we are here to present you a webinar about the Laser 4.7, and essentially we have that ambition to get you to know all the essentials about the boat within an hour. So Agustin, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks for hosting this and inviting all of us to contribute to this.
That's great. So we are going to learn much more about you, but I would suggest we go first um, through a slide. So we are going to figure out what is going to be the content of the presentation today. So this is a pretty detailed outline, and we'll go through all these points. But we want you to learn about the boat, about the sailors, about all the transition to the boat, from the boat, where to sail the boat in North America. We want you to learn about also the international success of the boat, especially in Europe. You are going to see some videos of one of the best ever Laser 4.7 sailor, and there will be time for Q&A. So regarding the questions, it's pretty simple. In the Facebook live window there, you can just write your comments, and we are going to have those questions, and then we'll bring them on the screen for discussion. All right, all right. So at this point, I would like you to visualize two things. One is the racing in the Laser 4.7. What does the racing look like? And then we'll have a look at the sailors from another angle. So regarding the racing, we are going to watch some pictures from the European Championships that took place in 2019 in France, and you are going to see both the female and the male fleets. And Augustine, feel free to comment, and also maybe to start with, maybe you should let us know about yourself and how you became such a prominent coach in Canada.
I've been coaching for over 10 years now, and mainly most of those 10 years I've been mainly dedicated to develop youth sailing, and I'm currently the head race coach at the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron, which is a yacht club in Nova Scotia, Canada. And I've been there for about not eight years already. And we've always with the passion of developing youth sailing, because I think focusing on that gives I find it very exciting because I get to not only try to set strong foundations for future Olympians or high performance sailors, but also get to really promote the sport that I love and the passion that I have for the sport, and try to really develop a lot of lifelong sailors, which I find those are two really key opportunity that I find in youth sailing. You can work on both at the same times, and that's what makes me wake up every day and what I'm so passionate about.
That's amazing. Can you tell us about your own experience with competitive sailing?
I grew up sailing in Argentina, and as most 99% of the Argentinian kids that get into sailing, we have a very competitive opti culture, and so I did the whole opti career, going to the opti world, South Americans, and all that, and after that. I moved into the laser radial, which was the smallest rig at the time in Argentina, and it was actually at the time where around the year 2000 when it was actually, or 2001 when it was actually starting to kick in, and being developed as an alternative to the laser full rig, as a smaller rig for for younger and smaller sailors. And at the time, it wasn't even an Olympic class, the radial at that time. And so I did quite some time there with all of my Opti friends as well. Many of us moved into there, and we did a lot of competitive sailing in the radial across South America. And then I was fortunate to qualify for youth worlds, and I went to that as well, and had a great time there. And I did have my personal experience, which I'm not a very tall. I'm definitely not a tall person, so I wasn't a tall athlete at the time. So I had my own experience on being very fast and very competitive in the light and medium winds, but not actually very strong or I was had to witness how bigger, stronger sailors would roll me over in the winter days in the radial as well. I remember even had that experience happening at the Worlds once, where I was like fighting in the top 10, and we had a very windy last day, and I dropped like 25 to 30 spots, 25 spots I think, in just one day of windy sailing. And after that, I got to say I got a bit discouraged because I realized with my size, I was never really going to be competitive in the light wind and the medium wind and the strong winds in the class that I was very passionate for. And then my coach at the time just suggested I should switch to double-handed, and that's when I started sailing 470, and that's what I did quite some more sailing later on.
Okay. So what are your impressions when you see these youth sailors at this European Championship in France, when you see all these pictures?
Well, I mean, if you look at the shots, and they actually look like Olympians. That's the first, they look like the same kind of shots that you get at the Olympic regattas. With all of the Olympic sailors, the radial and the full rig. You can see really good technique. You can see, sailors being very physically demanded, on those races for sure. And you can see you can see it in their faces that they're going through a very intense sailing day, and you can also see it through their body language as well that they're having a good time, but at the same time being very physically demanding for them.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's we see them on the water. Let's have a look at those sailors in a different kind of setting. Just a second.
Well, you can even see from those pictures as well. I mean, the technique is there, and it's hard to believe that those are 14, 15, 16, 17 year old youth sailors. They, as I said before, they look so professional, and they look so much matured and on the boat than what if you would find out what their age is.
Yeah, that's a very relevant point. And let's have a look at those sailors and also all these people around the organization of the Laser 4.7. Again, that was at here in France, and for people to understand, the Laser 4.7 is distributed globally, but the big concentration of sailors is in Europe. And so when you have a European Championship, you have many European countries being present. And I have a teenager myself. I have two kids, but one of them is a teenager. And what I can see here are teenagers. Sometimes on their cell phone and sometimes not, but most of the time not. But have a look at those kids, because or these young adults, these adolescents, because this is the crowd that will be joined by a new sailor in the 4.7. I think it's important to visualize. These are the people you are going to hang around. If you're a sailor watching this, this is the crowd you are going to join. Of course, you have also officials and volunteers. This is a big organization. We are going to look at the numbers of attendance in these regattas in Europe. They are huge, huge, much bigger than, for example, Optimist regattas. And so it's really important to understand this is a big group of sailors and of teenagers, and there is turnover, a constant turnover, because the sailors stay for just a few years in the boat, and then 3-4 years, sometimes 2, but they are not there for 10 or 20 years like it can be for example in the standard. You have some sailors who have been there 20 years, and but there it's really a constant turnover. So that's really, I think, important to. Do you want to comment on this?
Well, I was just going to say, looking at the group pictures, a cool thing that you can see is, as I was saying before, is you can see groups of really, lots of youth sailors having lots of fun and having a great time, not only on the water, but also off the water, making lots of friends, regardless of their sort of, size, whether, you could see some really tall sailors, shorter sailors, you can see more matured sailors, and I'm sure also within those groups of friends and that we're all laughing and having a great time, I'm sure there's also a really wide range of skills as well. But it's but that gives you an idea that at the same time they can all really share a lot of things. They share a lot of things in common, and they can have a great time all together.
Indeed. So let's move on to some key information about the laser 4.7. You want to go ahead, Agustin?
Yeah. So, well, as I think as it says over there, it was developed 20 years ago, geared toward youth sailing. The 4.7 comes from a 4.7 square meter sail. Which is only one square meter less than the radial. The radial is actually 5.7. Put some notes there, which are more like opinion based, which is the optimum sailor weight range. And by what I mean by optimum is like the competitive part of it. To be competitive at a high level, from like the pictures that you're seeing at those events, which is somewhere between 130 pounds to 145 pounds. But that being said, it is a boat that where you can also get started around 100, around an appropriate weight of about 110 pounds, which is about 50 kilograms. There is an important factor here that for international events, there is a maximum age of 17. So it's basically U18. In terms of international classes, but that doesn't mean that it's not like the Opti where you can't sail it after the age of 15. No, you can still sail it. You can still sail the 4.7. There's actually lots of master female sailors across the world that sail the 4.7 at the master regattas. So just as an FYI, the other important comment that I will make about the 4.7 in terms of the size, and I'll get this off my chest right away, which is we always when we talk about different rigs or different boats when it comes to the laser, I think we focus way too much in terms of like the weight, but I find when I help the athletes that I coach, I guide them into what would be the most appropriate rig for them. More than the weight, the key things that I really consider in my advice to them, it's basically their skills and also their physical strength, and that comes with their at what stage of development they are physically as a young person. Because I've had because that gives me a much better idea whether they're going to be muscling the rig, one rig or the other, and that's what I don't want. I think sailors really enjoy the physical aspect of laser sailing, but at the same time they don't enjoy it when they're completely overwhelmed, and then they don't get to show all their racing skills and all the fun that they can have racing.
All right. Let's move to the next slide, and maybe I comment here briefly. This is the laser formula that can be found in the so-called laser handbook, and at least until 2017. And I just want to mention that for years there's been a lot of misinformation about the laser 4.7, and you can see it on these on that picture, which is kind of a screenshot from that laser handbook, and it was presented as a boat suitable from 35 to 55 kilograms. This is not a boat for that kind of weight. 35 to 55 kilos, that's the weight range essentially of the Optimist. So it has been, the boat has been misrepresented a lot, and actually the other boats too, because now the laser has been around for 50 years. It's an Olympic boat for the radial women, men in the standard. The competitive weight ranges are extremely well known, and these are the ones that I mentioned here. So there is a place for the laser 4.7, there is a place for the radial, there is a place for the laser standard. These are pretty separate weight ranges, as you can see, and they are put in kilograms and in pounds. But please rely on our figures, because they are it's really important not to think that you can go into a laser 4.7 at 35 or 40 kilos. That would be nonsense. You are much better off in the open skiff or in the Optimist or in a double-handed boat, possibly like the Fever. But the weight range for the laser 4.7, the competitive one, is 60 to 65 kilos, and that means about 10 kilos more than what is the maximum competitive weight for the Optimist. So it comes after the Optimist, but there is still a gap. You can start the laser 4.7 out of the Optimist, but you will not be immediately at the body weight that is required to be competitive. But as Agustin mentioned, you have other factors like physical strength and so forth that to be taken into account. Let's move to the next slide.
Can I just make one quick comment on that? Just to be very clear, like I totally agree with those sort of reality, where as you put down there as the reality ranges, and to give the audience also a proper idea, when it comes to like the laser radial and the laser standard, those are roughly the right ranges where the current Olympic athletes are at, right? Like we're talking, going back to my point about the physical aspects of the sailor. I mean, we're talking about Olympians, which are professional athletes, which hit the gym, 5 days a week, and year round. They have a very rigid fitness program, strength and conditioning program, and that's where they are in that range of weight. But all I'm saying is that they can be at that range of, in the radial, for example, 68 to 72 kilos, but of being a professional athlete with high levels of strength and good conditioning for sure. And similar as we've noticed over the last couple of years, we're starting to see the same trend in the 4.7 as well. And at the last in the last couple of years at international events, where the 4.7 sailors that are at the top are sailors that are in that range of weight that Jean-Pierre put there, but at the same time are also very dedicated sailors in terms of athleticism.
Indeed. Um, what is important to emphasize is that, especially to the North American audience, yes, the laser standard and the radial are well known, but the 4.7 is huge. It's a big international success, and I've put on the slide the kind of participation you can find at European Championships and World Championships. The record number was 438 athletes. This is huge. Huh? It's about the double of what is an optimist world championship, and this is so. These are two big regattas per year with that level of attendance, and so in terms of numbers of participations, we have already seen the quality of the racing. It's a success on these two counts. Are the sailors happy? I will tell you one of my indicator of happiness of a teenager if the teenagers will sing in the shower, you see, or maybe they will sing together. So you can see there, I think it was in Greece, a group of 4.7 sailors singing together, you see. So I think there are very strong indications that the 4.7 is also a big success in terms of happiness of the sailors. And it's really important to focus on that, because teenagers get along well with teenagers. If you bring a 12, let's say a 13, 14, 15-year-old, and you bring them in a group of mostly young adults or adults, like if you bring them immediately in the radial, the experience will be very, very different. And that's why it's a mistake from a sailing perspective, but it's also from a social perspective. And if your goal is to keep the sailor into the sport, it's much better to have a very enjoyable experience. Any comments on this?
No, I think you're right. I mean, as you can see there, the 4.7 has very healthy numbers across, at the international levels for sure, and also really good for boys and for girls. And as you said, like it's a very healthy class, and it really brings together lots of young sailors from across the world to have a great time and make lifelong memories for sure.
Good. Now, I'm suggesting we are going to watch a video, and this is not your average sailor. He's a sailor who has been at the top, nearly at the top of the Opti class. He's also a sailor who has become a world champion in the laser 4.7, and later on in the radial as a youth sailor. So let's watch together this video of from Greece, Dimitris Papadimitriou.
and the 2000 European champion from Greece, Dimitri Papadimitriou.
I'm quite happy for final series are good races, but tomorrow is a very important day, the last day. I have to give it all my best.
You feel the pressure for tomorrow?
Yeah, I've started thinking the pressure for tomorrow since when I finished the race.
And how are you going to be the world champion? Tell us the secret.
I'll try to do sailing, only sailing. I will not watching the others, my opponents. I'll do my best, and I will try and let the other guys to make the mistakes.
Dimitrios Papadimitriou is all alone in the lead here. The mast is bending down and he gives everything, hiking there on the boat. Dimitrios Papadimitriou did what he had to do. He dominated the race from the beginning and won the final race within 1.48 minutes lead. The great champion of this regatta is Dimitrios Papadimitriou from Greece.
I didn't believe it, but my coach tells me you can win it. But then I said, okay, I'll try my best, and I finished first.
So, Agustin, what are your impressions about Dimitris?
Well, it seems like it was someone who went very straight from from the Opti and really wrapped up his Opti career, with a highly skilled Opti sailor for sure. And then going into the 4.7, he was able to continue that progression. He was able to continue basically everything he was doing in the Opti and turn that into in the 4.7 right away, and continue that sort of wave of sailing at an international level, and very likely, by the time he was sailing at the 4.7 Worlds, he was probably already sailing with a lot of the same friends that he was sailing at the Opti Worlds the year before, right? So I think it means a lot for a sailor to be able to keep riding sort of like an international competition wave one year after the other, and that's why I think it was very smart of him to go from the Opti to the 4.7 basically, because other than learning the techniques of the new boat, he was able to apply the same skills, starts, tactics, the same racing skills, and most of the sailing skills that he had got in the Opti, he was able to turn around and apply that almost basically right away in the 4.7. So he didn't have much of a new boat, learning the new boat period, right? So he went right into it, which I think that was good, because it allowed him to continue being exposed at an international level constantly.
So that brings us naturally to the next slide, which is the 4.7 as a platform for further single-handed skills development.
Yeah, that's right. So to me, in my in my area, run my program, most of the sailors come from the Opti, right? And basically, when I help, when they go out of the Opti, I try to meet with them and help them decide what's their next what's going to be their next boat, right? So it's important for them to understand or know where they want to go, and sometimes they don't know what their options are. So I usually try to ask them, well, whether they want to continue your progression, the progress that you've been making in the Opti, which is basically progressing on single-handed skills. If you want to continue that progression you've been doing in the Opti, basically I would guide him or her into the 4.7, and if it's a sailor that wants to explore new dimensions of sailing, then that's when maybe I would bring up double-handed sailing, right? So for me, basically sailors that usually move size or age out of the Opti are usually sailors that can already handle the Opti fairly well, because like it or not, if you think about it, the Opti sailors have a fairly long career in the Opti. Some of them get to spend almost 8 years in the Opti, right? And that's a lot of time, actually. Those are many years of dedicating it to one boat. So by the time they usually move out of the Opti, they have that boat very well figured out, and so that's why I find it's very important not to put them on something that's going to like blow them away, basically. So that's usually how I try to guide sailors a little bit, is help them decide whether they want to continue their single-handed pathway or they want to explore into a double-handed pathway, for sure.
Okay. Now the question, when to transition to the 4.7. Do you want to go through these various points?
Yeah. So as I kind of like mentioned before, usually between the age of 12 and 15, or even sometimes later at 16 or 17, the sailors could be at the right stage of development to move into the 4.7. In terms of weight, again, it's usually, I would suggest that of a minimum of 100 pounds, because if they're lighter than that, it's going to be very likely that they're not going to, it's going to be very likely that they won't be able to handle all the power on the 4.7. And then, the optimum weight is, yes, 130 to 145 pounds, but it is super important to also assess like the skills and also the strength, the physical strength of the sailor. In my opinion, a skillful sailor can sail basically any of the three rigs, right? I could be 130 pounds or 120 pounds, and if I understand the laser, I will be able to basically sail any of the three rigs. But the reality is, in which rig I'm going to be able to be competitive, right? In which rig I'm going to be able to really go out there to the race course and really compare myself and match up with other sailors, which is basically what I do when I go racing, right? So that's where I kind of like, if I'm 130 pounds, but I'm sailing a boat like the Radial, for example, then no matter how good my skills are, there's going to be a certain wind condition fairly low where I'm not going to be able to. It's not going to be about my skills. I might be able to like not capsize the boat. I'm going to be able to get around the course, but I'm not going to be able to go fast. I'm not going to be able to be as fast as other sailors that are stronger and heavier. Right? That's the reality of the rig. It's just I'm not going to be able to handle so much power.
Okay. If you don't mind, I'd like to cover the three next points. The fact that in the optimist career there is a point when the sailor doesn't have a very good plan. For example, recently I was talking to the father of a very good optimist sailor, and that optimist sailor had been to the Worlds, and it was difficult to develop a real program for the next year. And when you have that kind of situation and you have a lack of motivation, also the sailor becomes a bit too old compared to the average age there in the opti class. It may be time for a move. So that's one factor. Another factor is that I think it's important to, especially with the short sailing season in Canada, and the north of the US, to do the transition at the right time of the year. So it's either the beginning of the season or the end of the season. So when there will be regattas, the sailor will have had already several weeks, maybe 1 or 2 months in the 4.7, rather than being a total beginner in the boat when at regattas, which may not be suitable. And the last point, sometimes you have groups of friends at the level of clubs sailing together, and it may be easier just to hopefully to transition them at the same time. You see, so the group stays together, and also they get the training together to get all the tips for the for the new laser sailor. What is also, I think, important to get back maybe to this question of strict minimum weight. The laser hull is 59 kilos, and there are plenty of issues of to ride the boat after capsize if the sailor is really too light. So that's also part of safety issues, these kind of things. So it's really important not to transition too early, but certainly not to transition too late and to leave a 120-pound sailor in an opti like it has. I've heard sailors saying, "Oh, I stayed that long in the opti." Well, it wasn't probably not the best way to proceed. Anyway, let's move to the next slide. How to get started? You want to cover that one?
Yeah. So things that I would recommend is to make sure that the sailors have their goals set, right? I think the sailors, especially at a young age, it's important. Sometimes they are not aware of it, and that's when they need to discuss with their coach or the parents or other sailors, even in terms of they need to set some goals, even if and it doesn't have to be competitive, right? It doesn't have to be competitive. It can be just going out there and ripping around on the water and having fun and all that. But I think it's important to at least set some goals. And then, well, finding a boat. I think it's one of the main reasons while the laser has been around for such a long time, over 50 years, is it's because reality is they're somehow they're reasonably affordable, and especially when it comes to like second-hand boats, good boats can last many years. I actually have one of my sailors now that is sailing with her dad's old boat, so it's like a 20-year-old. I think it's a 20-year-old laser, and that boat's it's as good as the other. It's just a dry hull, and the reality is as well is they hold their value fairly well. Then when it comes to like the sails, it's important to have a good decent training sails, and then if you're going to do some racing, then you can get out your crispy sails. But having training sails is more than fine, and it depends on the wind conditions or what you're working on. But as long as they get you on the water and you log in some hours, it's totally fine. Then finding the right club or race team that it's aligned with your goals. I find this is very important because, you know, as I said, once you set your goals, then you can put that plan together and how you're going to accomplish your goals, and making sure that, you know, if your goals are very ambitious, or you know, aiming for a very high level to achieve a very high level of laser sailing, you know, make sure you align yourself with a program that is offering that. Or if your goals are to do more recreational sailing, more casual sailing, you know, make sure you also line up with a team or a group of people that you know, that have the same goals or similar goals as you. Well, and then last, as for the ambitious trainers, ambitious racers, you know, I gotta say, in my experience working in Canada, I find winter training makes a difference for sure. And also, of course, you know, improving the fitness. And when it comes to fitness, it's not only hitting the gym, but also proper nutrition and hydration for sure.
All right. Yes, winter training. I think also it's an indicator as to the real interest of the sailor in competitive sailing. Because if you just practice 4 or 5 months a year, it's about impossible to catch up with those, at least to keep a level that will be competitive with those who sail 10, 11 months per year. So it's you know, the winter training, I think, is a good indicator of the true commitment of the sailor. There is a comment that came up, and I'd like to bring it to your attention. I'd like to mention it again. You can put your questions in the comment section on Facebook, and we'll come to the questions a bit later on. But I'd like to bring this comment to the fore, because I think it's an interesting one. You see, Keith Richardson, hi Keith. Transition in the fall, water is warmer, winds tend to be better, especially in Toronto. Spring sailing can be brutal. Same thing in Montreal, and I think, you know, the capsizes when you do the transition will come sooner or later. And if the water is freezing, it's not a good experience. So I think it's a very, very solid point. What do you think?
Definitely, for sure. I mean, ideally, you want, you know, anything that will set a good environment to transition or to try something new. I mean, it's definitely better, right? And of course, the spring is where the water can still be very cold in Canada, for example. You know, when it comes to you know, the sailing way up north. Yeah, it's true. The spring gets very, very tough. You know, some sailors, you know, I've had sailors transitioning boats in the summer, in the fall for sure as well, and even sometimes they do it in Florida in the winter, where they can get you know, they can try. They have a very, it's like summer down there, right? So it's a fairly friendly environment to try new boats and try new things, and you know, and probably you know, do a little bit of swimming here and there, and that's it. But then, yeah, ideally, it would be much more productive if you can face into your spring sailing with a few hours on your new boat, on your new boat for sure. And that's kind of like general comment, I would say, not only towards laser sailing.
Okay. Let's have a look at this North American situation. And so the 4.7 has been around for 20 years, and there's been a 4.7 at some regattas, but nothing has been stable. But over the past 2 years, there seemed to be more genuine interest in making the boat happening. You know, taking into account that it's a huge success in Europe, and it's very hard to dispute the fact that the 4.7 has a big role to play in North America. So where is the action taking place? We'll talk briefly afterwards about the Maritimes situation and the experience of Agustin in Halifax. In Ontario, there are several clubs that are seeking to grow the 4.7. Royal Canadian Yacht Club, the Port Credit Yacht Club, Quebec. I'm in Quebec, I'm in Montreal. Pointe Claire Yacht Club has expressed a real interest to have a 4.7 team for next year. BC, there were several BC sailors from Royal Vancouver Yacht Club at the 4.7 Worlds in Kingston. And USA, certainly several clubs now are basically having 4.7 sailors, and this is significant. Now, this is very small compared, for example, to the Optimist, but it's significant. The changes are significant. There are fleets building up, and there is a huge potential for growth. And I'd like to emphasize here maybe the Florida situation. And there are two regattas coming up. One is the district championship, and the other is Orange Bowl. And both will have significant fleets of laser 4.7. So that's very encouraging, I think. Would you want to comment on that, Agustin?
Yes, well, I've seen, I think the 4.7 has always been a bit present in Florida, around, for example, St. Petersburg. But I've seen it going up and down, in pockets of popularity in different places in the States. But it's true, it's like it's never has built enough mass to actually, continue attracting new sailors. But it seems like this time, definitely this year it has been a record year for sure, and I hope this is built. And it seems like that there's this sense that it's just building more and more momentum, and it's going to keep carrying on. And from all the coaches that I talked to, they're all very excited and they're all very encouraging about this rig, staying in the long term. Because I think, yes, we had the 4.7 Worlds this year, in our region, but it seems like people are seeing the value. The sailors are seeing the value of it for sure. So when it comes to Florida, at the same time, I think we've seen a lot of opti development going on in Florida, particularly in the last, I would say, 6-7 years, where they've been growing multiple clubs and multiple programs there. Not only really good, but lots of good opti sailors, and eventually those sailors need to move on to something. And in the past, I've seen them, the majority of them would move on to double-handed boats, like Club 420s or I-420s, and a few into 29ers. But it seems like now a lot of them are moving into the 4.7. I think there's at least 4 or 5 yacht clubs across Florida that have already developed their own 4.7 teams, which is very promising.
Yes, Coconut Grove, Fort Lauderdale, and others, and it's really it's pretty noteworthy because I was a few years ago at the Lauderdale Yacht Club, and I mentioned that topic, and I can tell you. There was a line that was very, very rigid about moving to the radial, that there was no need for the 4.7, and now to have a fleet of 4.7. So things can change, and once they change, they can change pretty fast, because indeed the Optimist class has been very successful over the past years, both in the US, both in terms of number of participants, but also in terms of the quality of the sailors. The top Optimist sailers now in the US are world-class sailors, and so these sailors they get out of the Optimist, they need to go somewhere. And we had at the fall Cork regatta, there was these very top Optimist sailor from the US who came to participate, and he won. And that was really interesting to see that that kind of move, you see, because we have this unfortunately bad history of the 4.7 in North America, where the rig was neglected, sometimes having a bad reputation, but now things are moving very firmly, and that's why we want to encourage people to basically, if they had a negative approach about the rig, to have a second look, because I think a lot of facts speak by themselves about this. Why don't you tell us about the experience at your club? And we'll go over 1 hour, but no worry. But
yeah, I'll try to be very brief. So basically, in Halifax, as I said, we put a lot of focus on trying to develop lots of youth sailors, which some might want to pursue a high performance sailing career. Some might just might decide they just want to become lifelong sailors, but that's ultimately the goal. And we did try many years ago to develop the 4.7, but we got it started, but we couldn't keep it going. It was just it didn't catch across a region, but this time. We had a lot of sailors moving out of. We had a lot of sailors that were moving out of the Opti or moving out of the sailing school, that they wanted to continue sailing together, and they wanted to continue sailing in Singlehanded, and for that we found in the 4.7 a rig that could keep that great group of sailors, that was like a core group of like 5 or 6, that they want to train together and race together in a rig where when they moved out of the Opti and they jumped into this boat, they felt like that they could handle the boat fairly quickly. I think it was such a positive experience for each one of them to jump into a completely new boat that they've never sailed before. And then quickly find out that they could sail it around a course, right? And they could and yes, it was a little more powered than the Opti or what they were before. So we started with that, and then we started seeing more and more sailors that wanted to join, because it was a rig that would fit many all sailors at that age where they are where they're growing very quickly, or they're maybe holding on under growth, a little bit. So it became more of a social success, and became a very good training group, and became a huge group of friends, where they, beyond the class, they're all hanging out together, and they really enjoy sailing together. And each of them have their own boat. So that's some of the perks of the single-handed part, and they all keep progressing on their skills, and it's a boat that they can all handle for sure. So that yes, of course, there was for some of them, the original core sailors, they had the goal to attend the 4.7 Worlds this year in Kingston. So that was, as I was saying before, it was important to have a bit of a goal, and this were competitive kids, so that served as a great goal. And and this kid turned, all of a sudden we have six 4.7 sailors and six radial sailors training together. And the fascinating thing was that when we had new sailors coming into the laser or leaving the Opti or others, their first choice was directly to move into the 4.7. So all of a sudden, our 4.7 group grew up to I think about 10 boats or 11 boats, and while the radial remained as a core group of 5 or 6. So all of a sudden, we had a bigger turnout on the 4.7, with lots of female sailors as well, and it was such a positive experience for everybody that we haven't really had even on the light wind days. They're all sailing together so well, and they all find it so competitive and so challenging and so much fun that even on the light wind days, I don't have really sailors asking me, oh, like it's a light wind day, we should be sailing the radial instead or something. It doesn't happen. Like it's a light wind day, they try to improve their light wind skills.
Okay, so this is a picture of the group that went to the Worlds, and by the way, there were the Canadian Youth Nationals in Kingston, and if you look at the results in the top 25, there were many members of your team.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's no secret. It's not a secret formula that if you put a keen group of sailors to train together and put some time on the water, they're all going to keep getting better and better and better. There's no secret there.
Yeah, it's what many clubs have a hard time to achieve, but that's basically the key to the success. So there were the Canadian Youth Nationals, and again, that was a success in participation, although there were foreign participants there, but there were 66 boats, and that was prior to the Worlds. So big team from your club and from Nova Scotia for the Worlds. And there were many Canadian sailors at the Worlds. Some, I don't know what happened with that maneuver afterwards, but there were quite a number of Canadians, and I think it was really an interesting experience for most sailors, for all sailors. But it was tough. There was one Canadian sailor in the Gold Fleet, so it gives I think it gave and it was a windy World Championship, so. It was a reality check there that there was still a huge gap of level, but there were pretty decent results still from Canadians at the Youth Worlds in Kingston in the 4.7. So for your information, these are the two winners from Italy and Switzerland. And the next year Worlds will be in Garda, and the Europeans are going to be in Vila Moura in Portugal. So these are two amazing locations for sailing. They are crazily amazing locations for sailings, and these will be 400 plus participants events for sure. Now let's have a look, Agustin, at the North American key events for 2020, because I think what is important is for coaches, for parents, for sailors to plan the season for 2020. And sometimes you have a well-organized club and a coach who knows what's best, but sometimes one needs to do all the homework. So we try to facilitate that, and we have basically we're distinguishing two groups of events here. The events where we can expect significant fleets, and then other events that may attract significant fleets. So you want to go through them, or shall I do as you want?
Well, I think the Orange Bowl Regatta, I think that's going to bring together most of the Florida sailors, and also some other sailors of keen families that want to spend the Christmas in Florida. Then there's going to be the Atlantic Coast Championships, which are going to be held in the East. In Atlantic Canada in early June in the spring. Then there's the Bay Wind Regatta. It's the Sail Canada Sail East Championships, which are going to be in July, that will attract all of the Nova Scotia fleet, which I suspect is going to be over 16 or 17 boats by next year. Then the Canadian Youth Championships, which will be in Montreal at the end of the summer. That will hopefully bring together all of the Canadian 4.7 fleet. Then there's Fall Cork. Then the District 13 Championships in Florida in November, where it will bring together basically all of the Florida yacht clubs that are developing the 4.7. In terms of other events as well, the Laser Midwinters, which are in Clearwater in February, that's a very classic, traditional, successful events for all lasers. So it's basically one of the most popular because it's a key event in the winter where basically all laser sailors from across North America come together for an event over there. Then there's the Miami Sailing Week, which is going to be in Coconut Grove in March, and that's an event that it's lined up with not only the big event, which is Miami Sailing Week, which is a multi-class event, but it's also lined up with the part of the Canadian March break for youth sailors. So we will expect to have not only all of the Florida teams, but also plenty of Canadian sailors as well. Then there's going to be the North Americans, of course, which is a significant event. That's going to be in San Francisco, which is going to be, as you might know, it's a fairly windy venue. So I suspect that a lot of young, lighter radial sailors are going to realize, and they will go into the 4.7 to make sure that they can be very competitive in the heavier wind of San Francisco. Then there's going to be the Great Lake Championships in Rochester, New York in September.
Yes, and I have here another comment by Keith, which I'm going to put on screen. So there is a youth dinghy regatta at the end of June in Toronto. So that's interesting. Interesting comment. Thanks, Keith, for that. Let's move. Sorry, I'm having a technical issue here. Okay. Let's move to the next slide. And yes, we haven't talked too much yet about training, and also, what I want to bring as a background. And I'm the father of an optimist sailor. We did the transition to the 4.7, so I know pretty well how it works. But an opti sailor in the beginning, it doesn't do any kind of physical training particular. And then they become athletes towards the end of their optimist career. They become real athletes. They start having to really work on to the gym and the cardio, etc. And but it's still usually not advised not to work with weight, etc. at the early stages of the adolescent ages, simply because the athlete is growing, and then at some point the weight training kicks in, especially when it goes towards laser radial. So here is a video of our little star sailor from Greece, and you are going to see a bit how it works for him, you see. So Dimitris Papadimitriou became the world champion in the radial the year after he was the world champion in the 4.7. And he did that transition pretty late. I was really amazed. He was well over the 65 kilos when he did that transition. So he was really on the heavy side in the 4.7, became a world champion, and then moved to the radial. And today he's competing in the full rig with a hope to represent Greece at the Olympics. Let's talk about the transition out of the 4.7. Agustin, do you want to go through this?
Yeah. Well, as I said before, it's important for the sailor to know what they want. Whether sometimes it's exploring double-handed, or whether it's going into the radial if they want to continue pursuing the development of single-handed skills. When it comes to age, as I said, and I hope, again, maybe this is repeating myself, but to me it's such an important factor. It really depends on the physical aspect of the sailor, strength, and then at what stage of development they are in terms of skills. Most usual ages would be between the 16 and 18. I would, in terms of the radial, they're looking at a strict minimum of 145 pounds. And that's, again, this is to be, this is when I can assume that they're going to be physically ready, not only weight. No, it's more about physically ready, and skills will also come into play to handle the power of a rig like the radial. And I don't only mean it in light wind, because anybody can handle any rig in light wind, right? It's when the wind starts picking up a bit, and you cannot keep the boat flat anymore at your full, block to block when you're fully hiking, right? That's if you can't do that, at double, at significant double digits of wind, then you're probably missing that rate for sure. In the 420-29er, it's all about the combined weight, and I think it's important to find the right timing and to complete the session with the same rig, so you're not switching back and forth. I find it a lot of sailors, what they sometimes do is they switch rigs based on the forecast that they see, but I find then those tend to not develop a wide range of skills and a wide range of wind conditions, right? If you're always going to be hiking, you're never really going to learn how to sail without hiking, for example, right? If you're always setting up your rig so that you're going to be hiking when it comes to racing, then you might miss some development opportunities for sure.
All right. So no urgency to transition to the radial.
I think the point on that is, in terms of no urgency, I think it is you have to take a look at, if you're a sailor and you're looking at transitioning into the radial, take a real look on what are the sailors, the radial sailors that are succeeding in the radial. What do they look like, right? In terms of height, in terms of size, in terms of strength, in terms of skill, right? Because if you're a sailor and you're ready to get on that, then you're gonna have fun competing against those sailors. But if there's a huge difference, you're probably you're not gonna have a positive experience, right? And I find that when it comes to youth sailing, there's a fine balance between keeping things exciting and challenging, but at the same time positive, right? So it's not only about making it tougher, it's about making it challenging and still positive.
Good. Regarding questions, we are close to complete the formal presentation, so don't hesitate to put your comments or questions in the comments section so we can address them. I've written a piece which is called 20 Reasons to Choose the Laser 4.7. A friend of mine said, "Oh, I'm going to write 21 reasons for the RS Aero." But he has not done it yet. But I think that if you want to go to have a more in-depth look, you see, this is an opportunity. You see, just two things that come to my mind. You see the first picture. So you are going to see sailors, both girls and boys. For sure there are more boys, but still it's a pretty decent balance that is going on naturally compared to other classes, and especially when for later on in the laser where less and less girls are attracted to the boat. And it's also a boat with role models. So there you see a picture of Robert Scheidt. And I think the laser has that to offer, to have role models, to have these living legends of sailing, still sailing the boat. And I think it's really one of the factors that motivates youth sailors to participate. You see, the sailing, I think, is desperately in need of role models, and there are another 18 factors that are explained in the article. How to learn more? First, I've created a Facebook group, and so this is a QR code that will get you to join the Facebook group. There is also another much more popular Facebook group, the Optimis Open Big Sailing, the one that I moderate. There is a 4.7 corner in that blog. And there is an extensive webinar about sailing after the Optimist, where I cover a bit the 4.7, but also the RS Viva, the windsurfing, and all these, the range of options that sailors, youth sailors, have the opportunity to try and tend to direct themselves towards. So this is really a lot of information is there, and the present presentation will be available also online, probably on YouTube too. Now, again, let's, I think, go through questions. I have here a few, and some comments. Let me go through that, but don't hesitate, because I think it's here is one by I think he's the head coach from Alberta. He's from Switzerland originally, and here it goes. Okay, so I think Laurie was very surprised when he came to North America to see all these sailors in the radial that were totally unable to sail in. I can concur with him, and I can tell all of you a personal anecdote. And initially, I was not paying too much attention to youth sailing, I must admit. I was going to Cork with my kids, with my daughter, and I was not paying attention too much. But I remember vividly well a very, very good Optimist sailor. He won full Cork 1 year. So it means you have a level of sailing when you win that regatta. And when he moved to the laser radial, his results went downwards tremendously. And I saw him once sailing on the water, and I'm a laser sailor myself, and I could see a sailor who was not motivated. He was not using the right techniques. There were plenty of things that didn't go well, and that sailor, by not a surprise, has mostly given up on sailing. But essentially, when you move to the the radial from the Optimist, what happened is that you cannot compete. As simple as that. So if you are a top sailor in the Optimist and you just cannot compete, not because you don't have the tactics, the strategic, even the boat ending skills, but if you just cannot make it because your physique is not the right one for the boat, it's very, very disappointing. It's demotivating. And so when I saw that, I said to myself, it's one of the reasons I'm doing this myself, and I've put my son in the 4.7 because my daughter went through that too, and it was very disappointing. And eight knots is truly when things start hurting for an underweight. You don't need much wind to be overpowered in the radial if your physique is not the right one. Huh? 12 knots, and things get really bad. What do you think about this, Agustin?
Yeah, I think I agree there. I think there's a level, there's a level of excitement when it comes to sailing powerful boats that get sailors going, and it's very exciting. But there's a fine line. I find that if it's too overpowered, it becomes truly overwhelming, and it just goes beyond just the level of comfortness. Getting the sailors outside of their comfort zone is great, because that will push them and that will motivate them, and that will make them work hard and enjoy it. But then going way beyond that, it can be very demotivating because it can be just purely frustrating. So I find that I see a lot of that actually as well with the radial fleet in North America. It is true that we tend to have many events where it's not very, very windy, like where the average winds might be a little bit lighter. But the reality is, a lot of the top sailors, they keep kind of getting at the top because they're not only skilled, but they're also very strong, and they have the right size for the radial, right? Where other sailors might have the right skills, but they can't compete if they don't have the right strength, the needed strength or size to muscle that boat. So yeah, I find it, we see a lot of that in Kingston, for example, where the wind blows over 12 knots, and it becomes more of a muscle race rather than a skillful race where it's a combination of all of things, right? In Cork, at Youth Cork, the reality is if it gets above 10 knots, it's who can hike harder, and that will get you to the top of the fleet for sure.
Yeah, that's in the radial. Here is a comment. I will address it immediately. Greg, 210 pounds. That's a little bit on the heavy side of the full rig, but you can still compete in master races there. I don't know what's your age, but otherwise, yeah, it's a question of either losing a bit of weight or which something I can talk hours about it because I did that at some point, but there is no secret. Above 200 pounds in the laser full rig, it really loses a lot of the performance is the loss of performance is pretty dramatic.
I think as we said before, the size ranges that we mentioned before are geared towards high performance sailors, right? Like those are the range of where the high performance sailors are right now that we see. But it doesn't mean that if you're not on that range, you can't enjoy the boat as well. Yes, you're going to have a disadvantage when it comes to being competitive. But it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it.
Indeed. Here is a comment by Patricia, and maybe I'll let you comment, Agustin.
Yeah, well, Patricia, there's lots of there's actually lots of laser action happening this winter. Not only basically a lot will be in Florida for sure, and we will. I know even myself and with a bunch of other coaches from other clubs, we're going to be hosting some youth camps in March, and we'll also be having sailors as well going into the later midwinters, and a lot of the events that were mentioned on that schedule for sure. But yeah, I would say check out get in touch with some of the coaches in your region, and I'm sure they'll be able to connect you with some of the clinics that are going to be happening. But there's lots of action for sure. We're probably going to be having at least 15 sailors in the 4.7 training together and racing, doing regattas together across this winter.
And in that regard, join that Facebook group we created, and let's try to get the information flow, because it's really a question of accessing the information. Here is a point by Eugene, and I'd like to first comment on this one, and Agustin comment further on, if you prefer. The bad experience in the 4.7, I think the prime bad experience is when the 4.7 is mixed with the radial. If you race a competition, and that's what is going on in Quebec, they basically have a same start and the same ranking for both the 4.7 and the radial. It's impossible, except in very special circumstances, to compete in the 4.7 against the radial. So very quickly after the start, the 4.7 are left behind. They get all the bad wind, and this is bad experience. Also, if you have a 15, 16 years old, and is more with 18, 19, 20 years old, it's an issue too. So the bad experience come when there is not a group. I think once you have a group of 4.7 sailors, and so you need a club that says, I'm going to put a team together of 4.7 sailors, then I don't see any reasons why not having an amazingly good experience.
Well, I think because I hear this a lot, of course, in my context, is that over the last basically forever in North America, we have undermined the potential of the 4.7 by quickly assuming it's a boring rig or just giving up on the challenge that it is when it's light wind. The winds are lighter, and a sailor that normally sails a 4.7 could also be sailing a radial, right? But with that same mentality, then a radial sailor should be sailing a full rig sailor. A radial sailor should be sailing a full rig when it's less than 8 knots or 10 knots, right? So I think it has been I think it's being undermined, and that is why Jean-Pierre put a good effort into trying to show some of the 4.7 action that happens in Europe, with all those action pictures of sailors really working really hard and getting all that juice out of the boat for sure, and at the same time also showing about the Greek sailor who how dedicated it is and how hard he works for the 4.7, because I said it's been giving in North America, it's been giving more of the concept of a dummy boat or a dummy rig, right, which is like a kind of like a joke rig, so that if you're not a real laser sailor if you sail that rig and all that, but that's what's been happening here in North America, and which is unfortunate, because then we have two things. One is we're not developing our youth sailors in the lasers to the potential that we actually could. And number two, then we have lots of regattas where, yes, we might have a very big radial fleets in North America, but whenever the wind goes above 11 knots, most of the, half of the fleet, or like Laurie was saying before, half of the fleet can't really handle all that boat, and it doesn't really becomes an interesting race anymore because it's just a muscle race for sure. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Laurie is emphasizing your point. He believes that swapping around the rigs is hurting the development long term. Getting time into the boat, even with light winds, teaches you a lot about handling and boat balance. I was talking to one of the top coaches in the world, and I showed him videos of actually of some of your sailors in training in Kingston in relatively light wind, and he said, I'm amazed how these kids can get the 4.7 moving. Let's not forget, these kids are, that they will be 120, 130 pounds. So that even with a smaller sail, they can go pretty fast upwind, and so it's for sure the swapping around of the rigs and the mixed fleets with the radial, all of that kills the 4.7. I see it Quebec, and in Europe they basically made the effort 20 years ago they started 20 years ago to develop the laser 4.7 as a kind of a separate boat from the radial, from the full rig, and it worked. So it's really a matter, from my perspective, to apply the same recipes of success that they have in Europe, and Europe is producing, the top youth sailors in the 4.7, in the radial, and then that becomes full rig for men, and it becomes producing the next Olympians too. So they get it right, and I'd like to emphasize that in Canada, at least we had, over the past 2 years, we had 4.7 fleets at Cork and at the Youth Nationals. And I think that's there to stay, which is the good news. In the US, US sailing is not really recognizing the 4.7. So you have youth sailing championships in the US. There is no 4.7 fleet. They even include the full rig. They include the radial, but there is no 4.7. So there is a lot of work to do. But it's all feasible, because if you transfer the experience from Europe and you implement the same approach in North America, things can go very fast. And in terms of attendance to regattas, when the huge numbers now at Opti regattas in the US, I think there is a huge potential for growth. I'm just re-emphasizing that point. Maybe we should wrap it up. Maybe you have some concluding. Here is just another point. I'm going to put it on Patricia again. What I would suggest, Patricia, is for you to network with other parents and coaches and the clubs and try to set up a 4.7 fleet somewhere in the Northeast. I was myself talking to the parent of an Opti sailor who trains out of Newport, Rhode Island, and I said, Newport, Rhode Island would be amazing for having a 4.7 fleet, and there would be linkages also with the Canadian sailors. I'm pretty sure that if there is a demand, and the magic number, a magic number would be 8. You see, if you find 8 parents who are prepared to go for the 4.7 for their kids, then a club will certainly host them and have a coach to train in the 4.7. It can be a smaller number, but I mean there is this huge potential. But I think there is a lot of networking to be done, and the parents need to play a role because it doesn't come naturally. It requires a bit of work, a bit like what Agustin did in Nova Scotia. Your thoughts on this, Agustin?
Well, I think again the usual challenge is with putting the sailors in or undermining the potential of the 4.7 for the right sailors. Again, and many times the most common mistakes programs will do is to gear sailors towards straight into the radial, and which in some cases might be not the right rig or a bit of an overwhelming rig or overpowered rig for the sailor. Just assuming that eventually the sailor will just grow and learn, right? And once they grow, they will be the right size. Well, but why not put them on the rig that they're the right size, and then their potential will be better developed, right?
In the case of the son of Patricia, he's 13. There is no problem to sail the 4.7 at age 13. Actually, I think about 1/3 of the participants at the Youth Worlds, or the Youth Europeans at least, are in the U16 category. So they are 13, 14, 15. It's okay to move at age 13, and there are many optimist sailors who grow faster than to become a competitive world-class optimist sailor. I can tell you there are plenty of criteria to meet, and one of the things is that you should not be over 100 pounds or so. Otherwise, so if a sailor at age 13 starts be close to that weight or even heavier, there is very small chances that sailor can have a fulfilling career for another 1 or 2 years in the optimist, and there is no. So age 13 is perfectly fine to move the 4.7. The challenge is to find a club that will host your son and hopefully have a team, you see. So the 4.7 sailors will train together, and they will have their own race program and training program, and then but the potential is so huge that maybe in 2 years there will be 10 clubs with 4.7 fleets in New England and so forth.
What I will tell Patricia is, think of, and most of the audiences, like, and I say this very often, think of the 4.7 as the bigger opti, right? So if you felt like you didn't get to spend enough time on the opti because you're sized out or you aged out, think of the 4.7 as a bigger opti, as a vehicle to continue all that learning, all that development, all that progression that you were making in the opti. The huge risk of jumping into an oversized rig for a sailor is that it will shrink their skill development, right? Because on one end, the sailor will not develop lighter wind skills because they don't need to work that hard for, right? Because we typically see 120 pound, 120 pound sailor in the radial. Well, they're not really developing their light wind skills, even if they sailed the 4.7 before. But they said, well, in light wind, it's light wind, so I'm going to be sailing the radial. Well, then they're not developing their light wind skills. Then in the middle range, they're going to be fine. But then in the windier ranges, they're going to be way overwhelmed, and again, they're not really going to be developing any skills there because they're just overwhelmed and overpowered, right? So when you're not the right fit, or the rig's not the right fit for you, you're just shrinking all your development potential. You're not just getting all the potential you would get. So that's why I strongly encourage sailors to really consider this option of the 4.7 if it might be more suitable for their development.
Yeah. What I'd like to mention also is that in the region you mentioned, especially in New Jersey, for example, but New York, there is a growing fleet of RS Fiva, and the Fiva is an amazing double-handed boat that may be a good fit for your son as long as you find a crew. But there are huge fleets there developing Long Island, and it may be an opportunity to do double-handed sailing, and double-handed sailing can be for 1 or 2 years and then moving back to single-handed. So there are the RS Viva option, I think, is a very good one. And if you want to check the previous webinar I did on youth sailing, I talk pretty extensively on about the Viva. We are going to wrap it up. Any concluding comments, Agustin? Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for hosting, and thanks for organizing this. I think it's great to see this boat being seeing the increased potential and the increased interest in it, because I think it's going to do nothing but great things for the further development of youth sailors. I think it's going to create not only better youth sailors, but more youth sailors, and it's going to provide a way more, a much more positive and challenging experience for all of them, for sure.
That's great. So, Agustin, thank you so much. I know you had a long day, but you are heading in the right direction. You are heading south, so I will not, what would be, I think you should not be, there is no too much complaint to have. You see, anyway, these are my words. But I have to thank all of you for your attention. Please do not hesitate to share the webinar with anyone who is interested. And you can also contact us via social media if you have any further questions, or if you need any tips, if you want to be put in touch with some people. Join the Facebook group or the Facebook group, so you can be part of that small community we are trying to build. And again, thanks so much, Agustin, for your participation. It was also an interesting technical challenge, and it seems that we have reasonably addressed it. So that was an interesting bit too. Anyway, thank you so much, and good evening.
Thank you, and good evening to everybody. Thank you, JP.